Whose fault is it that we can't have kids? Do you even understand what we've been through these past 3 years? We live in my mother-in-law's house. My mother-in-law blurted this out in a fit of rage as soon as we got home. My husband seemed to sense something was off with her behavior. He stood in front of me protectively. I had married the man I loved, and it's been 3 years since we started living with his parents. Every day, I endured my mother-in-law's sarcasm. Because we didn't have children. I do want kids someday. But I know it's tough to balance work and raising a child. My mother-in-law, however, disregarded these complex issues and blamed me relentlessly. I've been tolerating her relentless criticism and her intrusive nature. But it seemed I had finally reached my breaking point. One day, I came home to find my room completely empty. My clothes, bags, furniture like my bed, and even the book I was reading, everything had vanished. Shocked, I was at a loss for words. My husband frantically searched and found everything stuffed in bags and dumped at a nearby garbage disposal site. Furious at her actions, he confronted his mother, but she showed no remorse and instead scolded me. Always lying about considering it. A foolish daughter-in-law like you, a scam artist who can't even have kids. With hateful eyes, she glared at me. Suddenly, she screamed and lunged at me, pushing my husband aside. Mom, stop! He shouted, trying to block her, but she reached out for me with incredible strength. Frozen in fear, I couldn't move. A daughter-in-law who can't bear grandchildren is useless. Just go back to the countryside. My name is Nancy. I'm 31 years old and currently work as an office employee. I left my small town in Nebraska for college and experienced city life for the first time. I was busy studying and working part-time while managing my first solo living experience. Interested in economics, I landed a job as a clerk in the accounting department, using my college experiences. I've maintained a good relationship with my parents back home, regularly communicating with them. I would return to Nebraska during vacations to recharge with family and friends before heading back to the city. I met Tom, who would later become my husband, a few years after joining the company. He was a senior by 3 years, working as a manager in the planning department. We first spoke at a company event meant to foster camaraderie, where we happened to sit next to each other. Despite the lack of previous interaction, our casual conversation led to a deeper understanding of each other, and I eagerly engaged in our talks. Tom was bright, calm, and kind. Captivated by him, I would greet him whenever I saw him at work and accidentally bump into him at the station, like a smitten middle school girl. Eventually, our relationship grew into having dinners after work, and after a few dates, he asked me out. I was ecstatic, feeling on top of the world to be noticed by someone I admired. Our relationship progressed smoothly, leading to an engagement. First, we visited my parents in Nebraska for a marriage introduction. Both my father and Tom were visibly nervous but bonded over shared interests like alcohol and cooking. Our future seemed to be sailing smoothly. When we visited my in-laws' house, it was the first time I met my mother-in-law, Evelyn. She greeted me with a bright smile. She chatted about my hometown and various topics, trying to ease my nerves. I felt genuinely comforted by her kind and smiling demeanor. Well, I'm gonna head to the restroom. My husband, Tom, said, sensing it was okay to leave us alone. As soon as he left the living room, Evelyn suddenly asked, So, when are you planning to have kids? What? Tom gets mad when I ask him stuff like this. Men are just so haphazard, aren't they? You're a woman, Nancy, you understand, right? She continued, taking me by surprise. I couldn't hide my shocked expression. Understand what exactly? I asked cautiously, not expecting to discuss children before we were even married. She replied as if it were the most natural thing. Well, if you're joining the family, isn't it obvious that you should have children? She was still smiling. Of course, I understood a mother's excitement for grandchildren. I, too, wanted to give my own parents the joy of grandchildren. But isn't the decision to have children something a couple should discuss together? And I didn't marry him just to have children. What would Evelyn think of me if I couldn't conceive? My heart fluttered with anxiety. I was still hesitating when Tom came back. Evelyn quickly changed the subject to her late husband, Tom's father. My husband passed away shortly after Tom became an adult. He worked hard every day, and thanks to his inheritance, we could afford Tom's college. I'm managing all right now, working part-time. Me and Nancy are planning to move to an apartment nearby after getting married. I don't want Mom to worry after all she's been through. Sure, you say that now, but I bet you'll be calling me over to help with chores and cooking when you're busy. Tom and Evelyn chatted happily. I tried to smile, but I couldn't forget our earlier conversation. The chatter continued about mundane topics like her part-time job and the challenges of standing all day. The topic of children never came up again. I tried to convince myself that Evelyn was just anxious for grandchildren and didn't mean any harm. Despite some lingering worries, we smoothly finished our visit and left the in-laws' house. A few months after registering our marriage, I got a call from Tom in a panic. Mom had an accident, he said. She fell down the stairs and hurt her leg. She can't do much on her own and asked if we could help take care of her. I'm gonna check on her every day since it's nearby, but can you help out if it's really necessary? He seemed hesitant to ask. Since our marriage, Evelyn hadn't mentioned anything about children, and I started to feel relieved, thinking I might have misunderstood her. So I readily agreed, of course. Evelyn's injury was serious enough to require a cast on her leg. Tom visited her daily as she struggled to adjust to life on crutches. Then one day, when Tom was away on a business trip, I went to visit her in his place. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, asked me in a casual tone when we were alone in the room. So, what are your plans for grandchildren? It's probably difficult by the end of this year, right? Are you actively trying to conceive? Her question caught me off guard, as it sounded like she was inquiring about our usual household chores. I was so surprised that I couldn't find my voice. Although it seemed like she had picked up on some terminology, the blunt content of her question left me wondering how to respond. I thought it wouldn't be right to outright deny her question, so I replied calmly, "We'll discuss it with my husband and make a decision." In reality, we had already discussed not rushing into having children. Since my husband had already mentioned this, he probably didn't know that she was eagerly anticipating grandchildren. But you know, there's also the matter of your age, right? You can't stay young forever. It's not like we won't ever think about having children in the next 5 or 10 years. We'll decide together, my husband and I. Despite my mother-in-law's reluctant expression, she reluctantly backed down for the time being. I couldn't help but feel that what she had said on the day of our wedding introduction wasn't just my imagination, and I could feel my heart trembling. To make matters more complicated, Evelyn brought up an entirely different topic. She suggested that we should sell our apartment and move in together here. Living together? Well, you see, with this injury, my body is in pain. And I'm afraid of living alone, especially after something like today. There might be days when Tom can't come, right? It would be a burden for you to come every time. Due to her injury, she had to take an extended leave from her part-time job, causing financial concerns. Since I couldn't make this decision on my own, I discussed it with my husband. He seemed more willing to consider the idea because he had been thinking about it already. It's not much different from our current address, and thinking about having to visit my mom every time she's injured or sick, it seems like it would be a lot of trouble. So, I've been thinking, maybe it's better if we live together. My husband said, not very confidently. It seemed like he was worried about inconveniencing me. And that's why he hadn't brought it up earlier. While there was some awkwardness regarding the children issue, I knew my husband cared deeply for his mother. Besides the words, there hadn't been any significant actions directed at me, so I couldn't strongly object. In the end, we decided to sell our apartment and move in with Evelyn. Since both my husband and I had jobs, we would go to work during the day, leaving Evelyn alone. However, my husband, who was busy with frequent business trips, and I, who worked as an office clerk, had irregular return times. But as time went on, things changed. When my husband wasn't around, Evelyn began targeting me with her remarks. Always about having children. She discussed our future plans, the risks of having a child at an older age, and even handed me brochures that seemed to be from a gynecologist's office. As you get older, your physical strength declines, so it's better to have a child soon. To avoid regrets. Child rearing isn't just the wife's responsibility, you know? If you wait too long to conceive, it'll mean I'll be getting older too. Yes, but we're still considering it, so. Of course, in the end, it's up to you and your husband. But having grandchildren in the house seems so enjoyable and wonderful. Well, think about it positively. Even though her words felt like pricks from needles, I had to hold back and respond with a forced yes, we'll discuss it. Since I was living in my in-laws' house, I couldn't risk being kicked out. I did consider discussing it with my husband at one point, but it happened to be a time when he was in the midst of discussions about a promotion. I didn't want to add to his worries while he was busy with work, so I ended up keeping it to myself and dealing with it alone. Gradually, Evelyn's leg fully healed. But I had already been thinking about how I wanted to stop living together. I secretly started looking for apartments nearby and considered if there was a way to leave my in-laws' house. However, within a few days, Evelyn announced that she had injured her arm this time. She explained that she had been working at her part-time job, and some items fell on her, and she had to put her hand in harm's way. My workplace called me, and I had to go to the hospital with her and handle all the paperwork. When we returned home, my husband, who had been worried and waiting for us, was there to greet us. As soon as she saw Tom, she clung to him, almost in tears. "I'm really sorry, Nancy, and to you too. It's all because of my carelessness, causing you trouble." "Mom, don't say that. How's your hand feeling? It's not still hurting, is it?" "I'm not in pain. I got some painkillers. I can't believe I've had so many injuries recently. I'm starting to get scared of living alone. There might be days when Tom can't come like today." Tom comforted his mother, Evelyn, saying, "It's okay, it's just a streak of bad luck." For a while, Evelyn pretended to cry softly. Then, she looked up and gave me a big smile. "I'm really glad we're living together. I'm sorry for being such a burden. I'll try to help around the house as much as I can, but it's tough with one hand. Nancy, please don't be mad, okay?" "No, it's okay. I'm just glad your injury isn't serious." I managed to respond, though I suspected Evelyn didn't feel sorry at all. However, I couldn't leave an injured person alone, so I continued to take care of her. Her hand injury wasn't severe. She could manage most household chores and daily activities without lifting heavy things or moving her hand too much. Despite this, it seemed Evelyn got used to letting me handle everything. "Nancy, about today's dinner, I don't want anything greasy. And please, nothing that needs to be cut with a knife and fork, it tires my hand. I'd prefer something I can eat with a spoon. How about beef stew?" "That's great. Oh, Tom got paid the day before yesterday. Let's splurge on some high-grade meat." "That's not good for our budget. I'm not asking to use just expensive meat. Just a little bit for flavor. Besides, it's good to have nutrition regularly in case you get pregnant." "Well, if you don't plan on that, then never mind." She continued to make unreasonable demands and subtly jabbed at me with her words. These conversations happened daily, and I could feel my mental energy draining. But being in a cohabiting situation, I couldn't afford to be thrown out of the house. I wondered if Evelyn had suggested living together to block my escape routes. Such a terrifying thought made me shake it off repeatedly. Despite our strained mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship, I decided to endure at least until her injury healed. And so, I stayed silent, not wanting to cause any trouble. 3 years passed since our marriage. Even after her arm healed, Evelyn kept saying, "The pain is still there. I can't even carry shopping bags from the supermarket." And she began to slack off on chores she initially helped with. Yet, she complained about the cleaning and cooking I did and rushed me about having children, maintaining a cold attitude towards me. Tom seemed completely unaware of these conversations, as Evelyn never mentioned them to him. I couldn't break our cohabitation at the in-laws' house, and my stress kept piling up. However, I became immune to her snide remarks and adept at dodging her probing questions. Evelyn must have been frustrated with my attitude. One day, an incident happened that clearly showed her growing discontent. When we returned home from work, Tom and I were shocked to find the house drastically changed. My belongings from the second-floor room, clothes, bags, furniture like my bed, and books had all vanished. It wasn't ransacked by a thief, it looked as if movers had come specifically to this room and cleared it out.
What's going on?
Tom was clearly astonished and frantically searched the other rooms, the yard, and even the neighborhood. I checked the closet, but not even a single lipstick was left. I was so drained that I just sat down. Soon, Tom came back, making a racket, carrying 2 or 3 garbage bags stuffed with clothes and bags. Realizing they were all my belongings, I screamed,
My clothes! Why?
There's more, the bedding, the dresser, all dumped at the garbage disposal area. I recognized some of your clothes, so I knew. Let's go check it out together later. Apparently, everything that was in my room until this morning had been dumped there. I wondered who could have done this, but the only person who could freely enter and leave the house besides us was Evelyn, my mother-in-law. Tom, too, had turned pale at the thought, but then, with a determined look, he stood up, grabbed one of the garbage bags full of stuff, and stormed into her room on the first floor. When he confronted her, asking if she knew anything, Evelyn coolly confessed, I did it.
Mom, why would you do something that's practically throwing Nancy out?
Huh. Ask yourself that.
What nonsense are you talking about?
Tom scolded her, but Evelyn slammed both hands on the table with a loud bang, making both of us flinch.
Do you even understand what you've been doing these past 3 years?
At that moment, Tom quickly stepped in front of me, perhaps thinking she was going to lunge at me. She was glaring at me with hatred in her eyes, over Tom's shoulder.
I'm asking whose fault it is that you can't have kids. You keep deceiving with talks about plans and considering, but you never really intend to have children. A foolish daughter-in-law and a fraud who can't even have kids.
Tom stood between me and Evelyn, protecting me from her. But it was clear from his profile that he was shaking at her sudden change. Realizing that her gathering and disposing of my belongings was truly meant to drive me out, frustration welled up in me, overshadowing my sadness. I had never imagined that enduring her tactless sarcasm every day for these 3 years would lead to this. Evelyn pointed at me accusingly, her face filled with rage.
A daughter-in-law who can't produce grandchildren is no use to my son. Just go back to the countryside.
Suddenly, Evelyn stood up and tried to push past Tom to grab me.
Mom, stop!
Tom managed to hold her back, but she was screaming, talk. I'll make that foolish daughter-in-law understand. Despite being slim and weak, her determination was frightening. Tom, while restraining her to avoid injury, instructed me to take your stuff and get out. I hurriedly stood up, grabbed a few garbage bags, and rolled out of the house. Evelyn's screams of liar, shameless woman, echoed behind me. Tom somehow calmed his mother down and left the house to join me. We got a room at a nearby reasonable hotel to discuss our future. Seeing Evelyn's drastically changed behavior, Tom was slumped on the bed, completely drained. What's happened to Mom? I felt bad for Tom, who was so tired, but I had finally made up my mind. I opened up about everything Evelyn had done to me, rushing me about having kids before our marriage, the constant sarcasm, and her actions without hiding anything. It was hard for me to tell such things to my husband, who I knew cared about his family. But after hearing everything, Tom, with tears in his eyes, apologized. I'm sorry I didn't notice.
The reason you didn't consult me sooner was my job, right? I'm sorry for making you worry so much. I wanted to spare you any trouble with Mom, but without realizing it, I've been relying on Nancy too much. It's not like that. I regret not talking about your mom sooner. If I had started the conversation earlier, maybe things could have been better. Anyway, I'm on Nancy's side, not Mom's. Please believe that.
My husband and I held hands and spent the entire night discussing our future. Then, we collect the belongings from the garbage disposal area before the garbage collectors arrive. Since we had no place to store them, Tom got a referral from a friend who runs a rental storage facility, and we moved our large items like furniture there. From those, we only picked up what we needed for our hotel stay. We had no intention of returning to the in-laws' house, so we spent a few days living in the hotel. The next day, we started looking for a new place to live, using our paid time off and finding a rental in between work commitments. Finally, Tom and I managed to sign a lease and went to the municipal office for the necessary procedures. After all these steps, about 2 weeks later, we visited the in-laws' house to inform Evelyn. We weren't allowed inside the house and had our conversation at the entrance without even taking off our shoes. Unfortunately, Tom and I have decided to divorce. Evelyn, who had been glaring at me as if I were filth, suddenly opened her eyes wide and smiled in delight when I handed her the official document showing that the divorce had been processed. We had chosen to separate. Next to me, Tom looked dejected. Evelyn, now in a creepy high-pitched laugh, said to her son, "I'll find you a nice woman." Honestly, men of all ages never end their troubles with women. But this time, Mom will help you. I'll find you someone much better than this country girl. With a wicked laugh like a witch, she finished her business and went inside the house, leaving us outside. Tom stayed behind at his parents' house, while I planned to move my belongings to my new place. Tom and I exchanged a look and parted ways there. Time passed, and it was the first new year since our divorce. Suddenly, an agitated call from Evelyn came in.
What's the meaning of this postcard? It's a New Year's card.
A New Year's card?
It says you had a baby. What's going on?
Evelyn was flustered, lacking even the usual New Year's greetings. Over the phone, she ranted rapidly before screeching.
Why is Tom's name on it? You two are divorced.
The New Year's card sent to the in-laws' house had a picture. A couple holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. Of course, I was the one holding the baby, and standing next to me was my husband, Tom. Since the names on the card were ours, it was clear that the man next to me was not someone who just resembled Evelyn's son. From her perspective, the son and daughter-in-law she thought were divorced were living together, and the daughter-in-law she believed to be infertile had a child, a completely baffling situation. Soon after the supposed divorce, Tom had told her he was going on a solo assignment. The plan was to divert Evelyn's attention a bit longer, but he couldn't stand her daily matchmaking attempts and left, saying he'd marry a younger woman once his work settled. Surprisingly, she was convinced by that. The solo assignment was a lie. Tom was actually moving into my new place. We had found a spacious family-type home to live together as a family, and I had already furnished it before he joined. So, we quickly returned to our normal life, like our early days of marriage, without Evelyn. Then, Tom married into my family, as it were, and we remarried. Hence, the New Year's card bore my maiden name. The address was my parents' house, which I had discussed and agreed upon with them. We had no intention of disclosing our real address. The baby I was holding was indeed our beloved daughter. Just before Evelyn, my mother-in-law, drove me out, I was feeling unwell and went to the doctor, where it was discovered I was pregnant. Tom had suggested, maybe it's time we start thinking about having a child. And fortunately, we were successful. After sharing the joyous news with Tom, he proposed.
We should tell Mom too. It's her first grandchild, she'll be so happy.
At that time, Tom was still unaware of Evelyn's true nature. I couldn't help but look worried and quickly told him I wanted to tell her myself. However, right after that, the incident of being driven out of the in-laws' house occurred, and I lost the chance to tell her. Tom was so protective of me because I was pregnant. Feeling frightened by Evelyn's drastic change, we decided not to inform her of the pregnancy, thinking about the safety of me and our child. Furthermore, a shocking truth was revealed when we checked the belongings Evelyn had tried to discard. Among my personal items, there were a few smaller high-end bags and pieces of jewelry, luxury items for special occasions. All these valuable items were missing from the trash. Suspicious, we inquired at nearby recycling shops and found out that all the high-end items had been sold for cash. Evelyn hadn't just thrown away my belongings. She had selectively taken the expensive items and pocketed the money from their sale. Tom was utterly disillusioned with her greediness. We need to show her a tough lesson. We decided, keeping everything to ourselves and resolving to cut ties with her. Afterward, we arranged for an apartment, went through the divorce proceedings. All the while, Evelyn was completely deceived, unaware of the truth until today. Surprisingly, when she heard, she clapped her hands and rejoiced. Evelyn, who had driven me out in her desire for a grandchild, seemed to forget years of terrible treatment and urged me, "Come back home. Being a son-in-law is okay, it's still my grandchild after all." "I'm sorry, but we have no intention of letting you meet our child. We just wanted to let you know that the baby was born safely, so please don't contact us anymore."
What nonsense are you talking about? Come and show your face, won't you? Tom is there, right?
Evelyn started shouting on the phone. When Tom came to the phone, Evelyn's attitude changed completely, trying to sweet-talk him. "Nancy is being terrible, isn't she? Misunderstandings between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law happen in every family. I'm saying I forgive her, so bring the grandchild and come back home soon. I've hurt my back now and can't move." However, Tom wasn't fooled and responded flatly, "You said your arm was hurting till just before the divorce because of the injury, but you could carry a heavy dresser downstairs and to the garbage disposal area, so a little back pain shouldn't be a problem, right?" His cold retort silenced Evelyn. He continued, "We know you've been lying a lot. I can't trust you anymore. I don't want to see you or meet you. We've moved far away. Please don't try to find us. We don't want our child to meet you, ever. We don't want to raise them to be a liar or a thief."
Thief! Tom, what kind of way is that to speak to your mother?
Evelyn shrieked, probably confused about how to argue back. I interjected without missing a beat. "You cashed in my bags and necklace without permission, right? I could report that as theft. Even family members can be punished for that. I've already consulted a lawyer." Her silence on the other end of the line indicated she understood she couldn't escape. Indeed, we had already contacted a lawyer, who confirmed it could be considered theft. Among the sold items were irreplaceable heirlooms from my deceased grandmother and my wedding ring. While we couldn't get those items back, we managed to get Evelyn to agree to pay damages instead of reporting her to the police. Through our lawyer, we understood a little of why Evelyn was so desperate for a grandchild. She had been envious of her peers at her part-time job, who always boasted about their grandchildren. Evelyn's part-time job apparently had a pretty harsh female hierarchy, and even with her strong personality, she was constantly competing as part of it. Moreover, trying to keep up with another wealthy colleague, she secretly bought designer goods, leading to financial strain. I figured I wouldn't get caught if I did it while throwing stuff away," she said, explaining why she sold my personal items. Her selfish actions left her estranged and alone in the end. Later, she actually fell down the stairs and got injured. Since living alone became difficult, she decided to stay with relatives of her late husband. Having moved out, she was able to quit her part-time job, but she's still at an age where she can work plenty. Yet, she complains at her relatives' home, saying, "I can't stand working with those annoying old women again," and is treated like a nuisance by everyone there. Even though her injury has healed, she still owes a substantial amount in damages. I think her concern should be less about workplace relations and more about the need to work longer hours. And given her personality, it's easy to imagine she'll have a hard time finding a new job. At one point, Tom, our daughter, and I visited my parents' home. My parents were overjoyed with their adorable granddaughter, showing a level of affection I'd never seen before. Despite the divorce and son-in-law issues we caused, my parents were always supportive of us, even from afar. Having a strong family behind us was probably what allowed Tom and me to stand up to Evelyn. As spring approached, Tom's hard work paid off and he finally got promoted. After returning from maternity leave, I plan to get a qualification and try for a promotion too. Our lovely daughter is growing up healthy and fast. We've finally achieved peaceful and fulfilling days.